Welcome to Feminist Question Time, brought to you by Women's Declaration International, which is the leading global organisation defending women's sex-based rights against the threats posed by gender identity ideology. Our programme today is, we're going to hear first from Dianne Post from the USA, and the title of her talk is The Disaster of Trump for Women. Then we're going to hear from Delyth Rennie from the UK about a complaint about International Women's Day in Darlington. She'll tell us what happened in Darlington last week. And then we're going to hear from Nicole Mowbray from Lesbian Action Group in Australia about their case and funding appeal. I'm so pleased to welcome you, Dianne. But Dianne's come in from the countryside incredibly nicely to be on Wi-Fi and to be able to talk to us today. Dianne Post is an international human rights lawyer who's been working for women's rights literally since elementary school. And the title of Dianne's talk is The Disaster of Trump for Women. So thank you so much, Dianne, and over to you.
This whole thing started out with a question that came up in a meeting about the fact that the Trump administration is against trans ideology, both in general, but also in the USAID, which has been spreading trans ideology around the world. So because he's against trans ideology and taking steps to stop it, should we therefore support him because of that this is good for gender critical feminists and we should support it? My answer to that is no. And I want to tell you why and what are the results of and the ramifications of what he's been doing. And the reason the administration is against gender ideology, they believe in gender. They believe in it, but they believe that men should be in their gender role that they decide and women should be in theirs. They believe in the sexist stereotypes. They want men and women to stay in their buckets where they put them. WDI's position is to abolish gender completely. That is not the goal of the Trump administration. They don't want to eliminate gender, they want to enforce it. So many of the actions that he has taken have horrific negative ramifications for women in the United States and around the world, actually, and I'll tell you about that. About 125 lawsuits have been filed against him and his administration and the things they have done thus far. It's impossible to keep up with it. There is a lawsuit tracker that's being run by New York University. So that's the one that I use. I thought I would keep up with it, but I absolutely can't. It's a chaos. It is complete chaos here. Tariffs on, tariffs off, you're fired, you're hired, you're rehired. We're going to sell this building. We're not going to sell this building. We're going to stop this funding. Oh, well, we're only going to fund that. I mean, it is complete chaos. The particular harm to women is much. The Republicans who are in the US on the conservative side, the right wing, the conservative side, I know different terminologies mean different things in different countries. So it's the conservative ones. They introduced a bill to prohibit abortion altogether, even though some states have put it in their constitution, such as Arizona, where I live. They have introduced a bill to prohibit the mailing of abortion pills. 2/3 of abortions are done with the pills, and that's why they want to eliminate them. They have put out an executive order to stop all actions regarding diversity, inclusion, and equity. And of course, this is harmful at work, at school, everywhere. But what came out of this then was a list of words that are not to be used in federal government parlance. And that the list of words includes woman, women, female. So don't mention that they exist. How do you talk about pregnancy or anything without using the word woman, women, female? Gender is included, as is trans and gay, but they're using AI. And of course, AI is not intelligent. It recognizes words, but it doesn't know what they mean. So when it ran through to look for gay, it struck out the quote word Enola Gay. Well, Enola Gay is the name of the atomic bomb that we dropped on Japan, the second one. So teachers who were teaching about Second World War wouldn't be able to mention the name of the second bomb, even though they could the first bomb. It's just insanity. There are many attacks on voting, and here's one that specifically, now, they say this is because of gender. Well, let me tell you what it is. SAVE Act. It's called the SAVE Act. And what it does is says, in order to vote, you have to prove that your birth certificate matches the name that you're using today, or the identification you're using today. Their claim is that, well, we're going to stop transgenders from changing their birth certificate or, adopting a new name, etc. But what about women? Many women who get married change their names. So their birth certificate names will not match the name that they're using today. And what are you supposed to do? Carry around your marriage license, your divorce certificate, all of that stuff in order to prove you are who you are. I don't think you should change your name in the first place, but that's another question. They also have gone on a tear to erase women's achievements, as well as people of color, to erase any recognition, like on government sites, on Veterans Administration sites, any kind of things, military sites, to erase any any acknowledgement even of women's achievements. There will be no celebration of Women's History Month, no celebration of Black History Month. They've deleted links on the military website to women's achievements because it might be related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, which of course it isn't, but might be. They also erased from military websites the achievements of women and people of color, like the nurses in Vietnam, the first fighter pilot, the first infantry person, etc. They ran into a buzzsaw when they deleted the Navajo code talkers, because obviously they won the war for us in the Pacific, and they're not a minority, they're a sovereign nation within our country. So they ran into a buzzsaw with that, and they had to put that back. But what they're trying to do is make it look like only white men created the world. And I saw a really cute thing on Facebook which said, if you have to remove all the achievements of women and people of color in order to prove white supremacy, well, then you're really not very supreme, are you? So that is what we have to be careful of, is even when they give what looks like a good reason for what they're doing, it's not. This administration believes in gender roles, and we all know that Trump and the people that he's put in his cabinet, they're sex abusers. Most of them have been convicted or accused of violence against women, etc. It is not, they're not doing this for women, and they're not doing it because they don't believe in gender roles. They do. They just want women in theirs and men in theirs. They're also intervening, of course, in the medical care of trans people, but at the same time, they're intervening in the medical care of women. They're policing birth control, they're policing pregnancy. They have introduced bills to prohibit women from leaving a state. So, now we have states that allow abortion and states that don't. So they've introduced bills to prohibit you from leaving the state. They've called it trafficking, to take a woman from one state to another to have an abortion. They put a bounty on the head of a person who wants to help a woman get an abortion or leave the state. There are period trackers to watch when you might be pregnant. So we are warning women and teenagers, if they're using a period tracker, don't, because they then will be watching that to see when you might be pregnant and be following you so that you don't have an abortion. They have now done another thing, which is introduce bills to stop no-fault divorce. We went for no-fault divorce some, decades ago, because it was so difficult for battered women to leave their abusers. Well, now they want to get rid of that and make it for cause only, which makes it far more difficult for women to get rid of their abusers. And Texas has now arrested its first midwife, claiming that she gave an abortion. And she operates, she's from Peru, and she operates Clínicas Latinoamericanas, which is 4 health clinics in the Houston suburbs. She's a certified midwife in Texas, and she was an obstetrician in Peru before moving to the United States, and that's who they arrested. Texas also filed a lawsuit against a New York doctor for sending pills to Texas. Now, the New York governor said, forget it, we're not going to extradite her, no, we're not going to serve this, we're not going to do any such a thing. So Texas, of course, went ahead in absentia, and they fined her more than $100,000 last month. So the reason that they're against trans is the problem, and the ramifications, if they win that battle, is a terrible problem, and we can see the results already. And that's why I absolutely would not support them for any reason. And I think we have to oppose these things, but we have to oppose them separately, not joining with the right wing, but opposing them separately. because you probably heard something along this line of a statement that says, if you lay down with pigs, you just get filthy and the pigs like it. The other issue that came up in this discussion was that USAID, that they have done some very bad things, including spreading trans ideology. And so that we should be happy that they've gone. And some other people have expressed, yay, that's wonderful, because what they've done in our countries, particularly Central and South America, has been nothing but bad things. Have they done bad things? Absolutely. Have they done good things? Absolutely. But the solution is to use a scalpel to cut out the bad parts, not a chainsaw, which is what, of course, Musk is doing, and just cutting everything down. Now, you know that Biden, when he was president, he took away the gag rules so that foreign aid, USAID, could talk about birth control and abortion. Well, Trump has put that gag rule back on again so that any of the aid cannot talk about birth control or abortion. So this is how it continues to impact negatively on women across the world. Now, when I worked abroad, I got USAID money for my years of working when I was working abroad. And there are some stupid policies. One of the policies, and I railed against it the whole time, is you have to buy American. You have to buy American computers, American cars, including ordering them from the United States rather than buying a used one in the country you're in. They hire Americans to do the work. So most of that money goes back to the US. Our foreign aid money, most of it doesn't end up with the country that we're in. And their biggest problem is that, well, not their biggest problem, but one of the problems is they don't listen to the local people about what you really needed. Every single place I worked, they wouldn't listen to the local people, and I had to fight and fight and fight with them. I did fight with them and I won, but you really have to fight with them to force them to listen to the local people instead of impose their own ideas. One of the other stupidities and the kind of stuff that's going on is the story when it used AI, and the story that there was 80,000 condoms to go to Hamas fighters in Gaza. This was, of course, just stupid. It was a complete and utter lie. Most of what comes out of the administration is a lie, so know that to begin with. Gaza is a region in Mozambique, and those condoms were going to Mozambique in an AIDS prevention program. But this is the problem of not recognizing, like the Enola Gay thing, not recognizing what it is that you're seeing. Now, the Trump administration, amongst the many of the lawsuits, has stopped the payment of $2 billion with a B to foreign aid contractors for work they already completed. Now, this is typical Trump. He's been known for this. He's been sued for this over and over and over, that he hires somebody to do the work. Well, he didn't hire them. They were hired before him, but he hires somebody to do the work and he doesn't pay them. And that's exactly what he's doing. And what the U.S. District Court judge said in ordering him to pay the money is, Congress has the power of the purse, not the president. It is Congress who appropriates the money and decides how to spend it, not the president. The president's job is to enforce what the Congress passes. The court's job is to interpret what it means. What Trump is trying to do is put all three of those duties into his own power, and it is not true. That is a violation of the Constitution. Now I'm going to get to that. So after he was ordered to pay the money, then they started destroying the papers. So if you don't have the paper to prove that you're owed the money, then we don't have to pay you the money, right? So the a union sued on that, and then that was stopped, and we'll see how that goes. So did USAID do wrong things? Yes, they did many wrong things. It started in 1961 with our President Kennedy, and his idea was to show that the capitalist model of development would yield prosperity as opposed to the communist model. And what they did was big environmental projects like build dams, build airports, build roads. Well, they caused a lot of environmental degradation. They displaced a lot of people. They made a lot of mess, etc. Introduced fertilizers that increased the wealth for some people, but for the regular farmers, they couldn't afford it. And of course, it poisoned the soil and eventually the water, and there we are. So lots of bad things happen. President Carter came along, and he was much more noted for focusing on poverty. And he got rid of not doing those big things like that, and instead focus on small scale poverty. Well, that didn't last very long, because he only lasted 4 years. And then in come Ronald Reagan, and he was a complete and utter mess as well. And his idea was to advance US hegemony, to make the United States world dominant in trade and everything else, and that was that. So that caused us, of course, a lot of problems, and that's when we get into all kinds of problems with Central and South America. And we never gave any money unless you were our ally. For example, in Central America, there was a bunch of hurricanes hit in 2020, and we gave out money to a lot of these countries, except Nicaragua, because they're not our ally. So there was always strings attached to everything. And some of our worst behavior from USAID was in Central and South America with the Nicaraguan death squads, with supporting authoritarian governments in El Salvador then and now, with attacking Venezuela. Of course, they went after Cesar Chavez with sham community groups, and they designed materials for gatherings, and they ginned up a student revolution group, and they're saying that the last election was fraudulent, even though the National Lawyers Guild from the US had many observers down there and said that it was free and fair. So the Cuba and Bolivia are, of course, other places where we've just been horrible. And we're not in Cuba, of course. And Bolivia, when Evo Morales was president, he threw USAID out of the country because they were so terrible. And yes, it's true that some of those programs were infiltrated by intelligence officers. And I have to say, just a funny story for myself when I was in Russia. When I first went and I would travel around the country, I wasn't followed or anything by any FSB that I knew of. But after my Russian became good enough that I went without my staff, I would just go by myself to these trips, and I had hired people locally to do what my staff used to do. I was followed by FSB. And it became obvious to me that that's who that was. And we actually had a conversation about it. So it was pretty funny. So I thought, well, when the Russian staff was with me, he probably just talked to them afterwards. But after I started going by myself, well, then he had to follow me around. So yes, they do think that, and some people are, but certainly I was not. But we got into real serious trouble when we started doing government and civil society work. That's where we really went off of our rails. And I just want to give you something about Palestine to show the problem here. From October of 2023, the US donated 1.2 billion to humanitarian assistance for Palestinians. Okay, sounds like a lot of money. But in the first year of the war in Gaza, the US gave 17.9 billion in military aid to Israel. So our weapons and our military assistance is just dwarfs our humanitarian assistance, and that's true in everything, pretty much. The budget for our foreign aid is 0.07 of our total budget, and our military is 40%. So it's just dwarfed. So some of the good things and some of the problems that are going to happen, and there have been many since this money was stopped. The USAID money was stopped, and other monies was stopped. There have been many health warnings from countries, and I just want to give you a few of them. And that is, in South Sudan, 1 million children are going to go untreated for severe malnutrition. There was a program there where USAID went once a week to provide this emergency high protein paste, which is made from peanuts, to save the lives of young children with severe acute malnutrition. That's been stopped. It just so happened that the same time that this happened, I heard this story on the radio from a farmer. It wasn't a farmer, he was a manufacturer, I guess you'd call him, in Georgia, who was making that paste. So it was a plant in Georgia, the state of Georgia in the US, was making this paste, and he was talking about how he did it and this and that, and how one box of this paste could feed 3 meals a day to a kid for 6 weeks. But since this money was cut, he had to shut his plant down. So now most of the money actually went to Americans, not overseas to these kids in Sudan. So now he has to shut his factory down. So the other estimates from health officials is a 40% increase in malaria. That's up to 166,000 more people will die. 200,000 more children will be paralyzed by polio over the next decade. New cases of tuberculosis will go up 30%. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, 400 people were on Mpox medication, and it was stopped. In the Sudan, the US had already purchased mosquito nets, diagnostic tools, and treatments. They can't deliver them because they can't hire the trucks, they can't hire the drivers. More than $489 million of food assistance is sitting at ports, in transit, and in warehouses, and it's all going to spoil. So it's food needed, it's just going to sit there and spoil. Malaria is particularly lethal for children under 5, and there was a vaccine program going on. I don't know about vaccine, but it was rolling out a new drug to prevent children from getting sick. All those programs are canceled. And the biggest program was the PEPFAR program, and this actually started under George W. Bush, and it was the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, and it's in 50 countries around the world. Now, in South Africa, I mean, no, it's around the world, but it's credited with saving more than 25 million lives since it was first launched in 2003. And right after Trump was sworn in, the Assistant Global Director of Health at USAID resigned because he knew what kind of a person he was and he knew what was going to happen. And he said hundreds of thousands of people will die and many of them will be women. Now, the Center for Global Development is a different organization, and it says it estimates 3 million people will die within the first year. That's 1.6 million people from the lack of HIV and AIDS prevention that had been provided by the US. 550,000 who will die without food aid. 1 million who will die without vaccines and prevention for tuberculosis and malaria. That's 9,000 people a day, undoing 20 years of progress. And to note, Western powers have exploited these countries for centuries, and now we're refusing to aid them. So Trump has terminated 83 to 90% of all humanitarian and development programs. That's 10,000 of them. When he fired the employees, he did not follow the law because there are certain laws about how you can fire federal employees. That's why a lot of people like federal jobs, because there's actually some procedure that you can be protected, unlike in the private sector. There are also federal laws about the collection, retention, and destruction of classified materials. He didn't follow that when they started destroying those documents. On March 11th, the judge did order them to stop, and whether he did or whether he didn't, we don't actually know for sure. But he isn't doing this because he's going to pull back from intervention in the globe. No, he's not doing that for that reason, because he still has imperialist expansion ideas with his talk about, Canada becoming the 51st state and annexing Greenland, and let's take back the Panama Canal and let's make Gaza into a resort. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. So what is the impact on women? Tons of impacts on women. One particular story that I heard on our National Public Radio was there was a trial going on, an AIDS trial to prevent AIDS by inserting some kind of, they called it a ring, I don't actually know what it was, but some kind of a device inside of women. Well, they just stopped that cold. And local doctors said, you can't just stop a medical trial in the middle of the trial. So the local doctors had to remove these devices, whatever they were, and they did do it for free. So Trump said, well, there's nobody, you can't find anybody that's actually died from these things. Well, Nicholas Kristof, who is a reporter, pretty famous one, he went to South Sudan and he said within 20 minutes, he found somebody who had already died from these policies. A 10-year-old with HIV from birth. He died from pneumonia because when he couldn't get his medication, of course, the opportunistic infection then took over. An 8-year-old girl who died also with AIDS because she lost her card. She lost her health card and there was no workers left in the office to get her another one. A 35-year-old single mother and her 5-year-old son from AIDS, and 2 women with 3 children because the supply line for the medication was here and they were there and the supply line was gone because no drivers, no money, etc. So in South Africa, Desmond Tutu Health Foundation estimates 600,000 deaths in a decade because of the stopping of PEPFAR, the HIV program, and a lot of those are women. In Kenya, there was a widow who said she was able to find a new supplier for her tuberculosis medicine, but not the secondary medicine that relieves the side effects. So she could no longer work. And she worked at washing clothes at $1.50 a day to support her children. So what happened? One of her children had to drop out of school to go to work to support the family. Guess which one that was? Would that be a girl? Of course it would be. So she loses her opportunity for education. The UN Population Fund is another place where $377 million has been cut, and the clinic is now scheduled to close this month in March, as are many other clinics around the world. So the question is, how many women will die worldwide from hemorrhage, sepsis, or eclampsia because of this. Now, one way to estimate it is that it is estimated by the Population Fund that 17,000 maternal deaths were prevented in the last 4 years because of this funding. So the funding's taken away, so we can guess that 17,000 maternal deaths will occur because of this funding being gone. So there is no question that women are being seriously harmed and that they will continue to be in the future as more and more restrictions on women are happening. The protest here, and there is much protest, there is also much compliance, which is just disgusting. CBS caved in, Washington Post caved in, just yesterday a big law firm caved in. This is just disgusting and disheartening. But the people are protesting, they're huge, they're all over. Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are running around the country doing rallies to try to get people to fight this oligarchy, etc. And the place that I live, Arizona, is a conservative, but people are turning out in numbers like you've never seen before. And in Colorado, they expected 2,000 at the Bernie AOC rally, and they got 11,000. And that was in a red part of Colorado, a red meaning Republican, or the conservative part. So the biggest case today, and I think what's really going to bring us to the breaking point of whether we have a constitutional crisis or not, is the shipping of those 30 people to El Salvador to put in a brutal prison. Not all of those people were Venezuelans. Even if they were gang members, the law does not allow you to just pick up people and ship them out of the country to another country with no due process and no proof or anything else. The court ordered him not to send these people anywhere, and if they were in the air, to turn the plane around. He did it. After they landed, the El Salvador president, who is also a horrible person, put a tweet on X and said, oopsie, already here. So then Marco Rubio, who is our Secretary of State, retweeted this, sort of making fun of the court in a way. So the court then ordered the administration to bring in details about this and who was where and what was what, et cetera. So they didn't. They brought in crap. And the judge said, this is crap. So there's a huge uproar. This is Guantanamo. This is worse than Guantanamo. It's just awful. So this case is probably the one that is going to go quickly to the Supreme Court. And the question is, will the Supreme Court hold? Thus far, Congress is useless. President, of course, is horrible. So the Supreme Court is all we've got left to hold. And will it? Now, there have been 2 cases against Trump already at the Supreme Court, but they were small and on just minor little points and, another suit. And they did rule against him both times, but not unanimously, but they did rule against him. After this judge with the deportations ordered him to bring the people back, et cetera, then he said, impeach this guy, impeach this guy, impeach this guy. He doesn't have the right to do this, blah, blah. And the Supreme Court justice, the Chief Justice, did stand up and say, no, 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 this is not how we do things. You can appeal the case. That's how you do it. You don't impeach judges because they give an order you don't like. So the question is, as I said, will it hold? If it holds, and if Trump follows the order of the Supreme Court, the US will muddle through. We'll never recover. Our economy is going to tank. Well, this is my opinion. Our economy is going to tank. China will overtake us and stay there. We will no longer be the biggest economy in the world. Number 2, we will never be a global leader again. Because why would anyone trust us? They never should when we do things like this. And the problems with NATO, problems with all kinds of, Ukraine and all kinds of things, no one would ever, nor should they ever trust us again. So we will never be global leaders again. And maybe that is a good idea. Both Trump and Bondi, who is the Attorney General, have said they are not going to obey the court. If they don't obey the Supreme Court, well, then what do you do? Well, Congress can impeach. So far, the Republicans, of course, not talking anything about that. But just yesterday, I heard that one Republican has put the idea of impeachment to the party. That doesn't work. The next step is the military. And there has been some discussion with that. Some prior generals, they came out and said, the military swears obedience to the Constitution, not to a president. And that's true. You swear your oath to the Constitution, not a particular person or a particular president. So the president is the commander-in-chief of the military. So a question was put to them, do you follow your oath to the Constitution or do you follow your commander-in-chief? And these senior military officers said, we follow our oath to the Constitution, and Trump fired them. So we don't know with the ones who are left there, whether they're going to follow their oath to the Constitution or they're going to follow Trump. What happens then? If they follow their oath to the Constitution, well, again, they'll stop him and we'll muddle through. If they don't, I think we're going to have civil war. I think that the Confederacy has been asking for many years now. They want a civil war or to continue the one that we had before. And they want to win it this time, which probably have. There's also been discussions of breaking the United States into separate states. There has been discussions, there has been some legal work done and discussions about how this would work because of the extreme divisions between different areas of the country. And there could be 3 or 4 different countries come out of this one country, and it would look more like Europe with, many different countries in a smaller area, in the same area. So New England would be one, that would be over there. The West Coast would be another. And those are pretty much 2 for sure. The Great Lakes would depend on what happens really with Wisconsin and Michigan, if they can get in with Illinois and Minnesota for the Great Lakes. And then the rest would be the former Confederacy that was the South that fought, for the Civil War in the first place. And then the plain states that are just nuts. The new countries would have the most people, the most money, the most production, and the most agricultural production. But the rump country would have the nuclear weapons. The other problem would be the majority of African Americans would be left in the South. That's where they are. The majority of African Americans still are in the South. And that was part of the problem in the Civil War, was they'd be left in the South to the horrors of the Confederacy. And that would be the same thing today. So women are absolutely the target. People of color are absolutely the target. And while using the gender ideology, that's also a target, but it's a target because those men aren't the kind of men they're talking about. They're talking about white male supremacy.
We're now going to go to Delyth Rennie, and Delyth Rennie is, she started the new North Yorkshire Women's Rights Network group a number of years ago, and was then involved with the sports group and initiated the Park Run campaign, and actually did a presentation here on WDI on FQT about, because they said that men can say that they're women and be in the women's section of the running, so win the running. Sadly, since then, Park Run has continued with their misogynistic policy. And Delyth attended an event on behalf of WDI on International Women's Day, which is what she's going to be talking about today. So thank you so much, Delyth, for coming, and over to you.
A few months ago, a friend who lives in Darlington in the north of England suggested holding an event on International Women's Day. So that's the 8th of March, to a group of us. And she managed to secure a council-owned building with a shop front in the centre of Darlington, and it's called Number 40. It's advertised as a safe space for everyone, of course. Its purpose is indeed laudable. In particular, it's open every Friday and Saturday night to provide help to people on late nights out. So it's a really good idea, women who've become separated from their friends who are distressed and so on. So it is a laudable idea. It is council run, and it's joint funded by Darlington Borough Council, Durham Constabulary, and Durham Police and Crime Commissioner's Office. The organiser had been clear with the council that the emphasis was on women's sex-based rights. we were there with that leaflet and handing that out and talking to people about WDI and the declaration and and the articles there. We were also promoting the most recent WDI campaign, which is about ending sex falsification. So there was 2 pages to that, actually. Sorry, I've only put one there. But it just summarises the longer campaign brief about ending sex falsification, which is clearly very damaging to women and women's rights. So we were there with those, speaking to, well, networking with other groups there, and also we went outside with leaflets and were handing them out to members of the public, and hopefully people in the middle of Darlington who had no idea about any of this stuff. So there were lots of other groups there, including Women's Rights Network, Let Women Speak, Party of Women, Conservatives for Women, LGB Labour, Labour Women's Declaration, Protect and Teach, the Free Speech Union, the Social Democratic Party, who are broadly in line. They do believe a bit in true trans, but they're part way there anyway. And I'm sure I've missed some. So we were a wide range of groups with different political views, but all of whom were broadly critical of gender identity ideology and pro women's sex-based rights. And it wasn't, it's important, it wasn't a female-only event, but it was mostly women who attended. The event was open to the public, and the organiser had invited councillors from across the political spectrum, although perhaps no prizes for guessing which party's councillors were a no-show. Yeah, well, Labour and the Greens for starters. So as well as handing out leaflets and talking to people, we canvassed opinions about single-sex spaces and collected messages of support for the Darlington nurses who have been forced to take legal action against their employer. Their NHS trust told them that they needed re-educating, really, because they refused to take their clothes off in front of a man who calls himself Rose and uses their female changing room with the trust's blessing, indeed. So for those of you in the UK, this is very similar to the Sandy Peggy case in NHS 5 Scotland, which is well, only part heard and is going to be heard in July. And I think the Darlington nurses case is due in June, so that's going to be interesting. Anyway, the event was going well when an obviously angry man entered. This was alarming and upsetting to many of us. So a man, and he was accompanied by another man, stormed into an International Women's Day event. The organiser and the Let Women Speak rep were clearly expected to follow these men. And it turns out us individuals didn't know, but he was the premises manager. And the other man turned out to be another council employee. So this is what they were objecting to and found so beyond the pale, so offensive that, yeah, you'll see what happens next. Saying that women don't have a penis might obviously upset cross-dressing gynophiles or something, you know, and we don't want to do that.
Space for all on Friday, Saturday nights. Public sector equality duty requires us to foster good relations between all groups, and this isn't doing that, I'm afraid, so we'll have to ask you to leave.
Would you mind just showing me on the leaflet what it is in particular, that's just so we can sort of understand?
Non-binary is nonsense, transition children is profound abuse, no one has a penis, no one has a vagina.
Those are statements of fact, objective reality?
It's not objective reality.
What
Are you saying that a woman can have a penis?
I'm not saying that.
So
What I'm
what do you
saying is
object?
that is not a statement.
Can you just, I think you need to...
Can I answer your question?
I think you need to calm down a bit. I think you've come in very aggressively, and I think I need to remind you that it's actually International Women's Day, and actually your tone, and you look actually physically all hyped up, and I think you just need to take it down a notch, to be honest.
Okay, right, okay, I'll take it down. I'll relax. I'll show you how relaxed I am. There you go.
This is really
Right,
strange
I'm the least
behaviour.
aggressive person that Jim's probably ever met. I would like to answer the question you posed. I'm not disputing anything on here because that's not my job to dispute it. My job is to enforce the Equality Act, and the public sector duty says we have to foster good relations. Now, what you're saying on here, you might state as fact.
One of the groups is
You're not letting me answer. In the Equality Act, under the protected characteristics, it specifically states gender reassignment.
What about freedom of speech?
Again, you're not letting me finish. So if you're going to be aggressive, you're being the aggressive one.
Okay, I'm being aggressive.
Freedom of speech is fine, but when Darlington Borough Council are concerned, freedom of speech doesn't mean thoughtless speech. We have a duty under the Public Sector Equality Act, the Equality Act Public Sector duty, and we're going to unfortunately have to ask you to leave because this doesn't comply with what we do. The front space and this space is a space for everybody. And
clearly not for women who want to voice their opinions. It's clearly not.
No, it's not about voicing your opinions. This is a safe space for people.
Is it a safe space for us?
It's a safe space for everybody, but not to voice those opinions.
Following this, obviously, the organiser had to tell us that we'd been told to leave. In another clip, he'd said that we weren't welcome. So much for safe spaces. I can't see the irony anyway. Everybody agreed that we were not going to leave until the end of the event. We were staying. And so obviously she had to make us aware that he said, he'd also said that he would be calling the police if we didn't go. So what a depressingly familiar story indeed. So I've made an official complaint as an individual, which has been logged and is currently being investigated. And one of the responses I've had so far to let me know it's being logged and querying whether I was really there and so on, bizarre. There was little surprise to see pronouns in the signature of one of the communications, obviously. Many other individuals have complained and organisations as well, including WDI have lodged a formal complaint with the council as well. So I'll just read through my complaint and where I think they've got it so wrong, obviously. So I'm writing to make a personal official complaint of discrimination on the basis of the protected characteristics of sex and belief. By Darlington Borough Council at an event at number 40 on Skinnergate on 8/3/25 for International Women's Day. I attended this as a participant, and it was clear from the flyers prior to the event that women's sex-based rights and child safeguarding were the focus. It's likely you will have heard by now that a council representative asked us to leave despite being aware of the above. There are videos available on X of Andrew Allison's interactions with the organisers. It seems that another council employee, Jim Bone, took offence at a Let Women Speak leaflet that stated no woman has a penis, no man has a vagina, non-binary is nonsense, and transitioning children is profound abuse. I agree with these statements, although I was not with Let Women Speak on Saturday. I also understand there are people who do not agree with them, which I consider to be statements of fact, and that they are entitled to hold that belief. I do not consider these statements offensive, but I accept believers in gender identity ideology may find them offensive. Andrew Allison, who I understand manages number 40, said the public sector equality duty requires us to foster good relations between all groups, and this doesn't do that, I'm afraid, so I'm going to have to ask you to leave. He said he had to enforce the Equality Act and cited gender reassignment as a protected characteristic, apparently disregarding other protected characteristics. He continued to say, saying the leaflet doesn't comply and the space is a space for safe space for everybody and a safe space for everybody, but not to voice those opinions. The irony is apparently lost on him as he harasses, unlawfully discriminates, in my opinion, and has made the safe feel unsafe for everyone using it on International Women's Day. Mr. Allison does not seem to fully understand the public sector equality duty, but I consider this a council failure, as presumably his lack of understanding, prejudice, is due to insufficient training or indeed incorrect training, possibly provided by trans activist groups. And I say, please see the government explanation below about public sector equality duty. Public authorities are now required in carrying out their functions to have due regard to the need to achieve the objectives set out under section 149 of the Equality Act 2010 to A, eliminate discrimination, harassment, victimisation, and any other conduct that is prohibited by or under the Equality Act 2010. B, advance equality of opportunity between persons who share a relevant protected characteristic and persons who do not share it. C, foster good relations between persons who share a relevant protected characteristic and persons who do not share it. It is not lawful to promote one protected characteristic, gender reassignment, and give it precedence over all of the other characteristics, or indeed ignore the other characteristics. In exercising his authority on behalf of Darlington Borough Council, I consider he discriminated against me on the basis of sex and belief. I feel his conduct constituted harassment. His demeanour was aggressive and intimidating, and I wasn't having to deal directly with him. This was his behaviour entering the building. I would remind you this was International Women's Day, and that Mr. Allison himself repeatedly said Number 40 was a safe space for everyone. It certainly did not feel a safe space for those of us witnessing his obvious anger at an event centering women and child safeguarding. So, when Mr. Allison referenced the public sector equality duty demanding that we leave, he did so arguably in contravention of the public sector equality duty sections A and B. He completely disregarded or was unaware of these aspects of the PSED. You cannot do that. It isn't pick and choose. In relation to section C, which he was citing, one needs to consider that freedom of expression may be considered offensive by someone simply because they don't agree with a particular statement. This is important. And then a quote, free speech includes not only the inoffensive, but the irritating, the contentious, the eccentric, the heretical, unwelcome, and the provocative, provided it does not tend to provoke violence. Freedom only to speak inoffensively is not worth having. And that was a case, Redmond Bate versus the DPP in 1999. And that was in the judgment. To be clear, Mr. Allison demanded we leave because one leaflet said no woman has a penis. On the basis of his colleague finding this offensive, he considered it contravened the public sector equality duty to foster good relations. On arrival at the venue, there were many so-called progress flags on display. I consider these extremely offensive, so I could equally argue they are a contravention of the public sector equality duty. The difference is that I don't think I have a right not to be offended. I don't like it, but I value free speech and freedom of expression. Furthermore, Mr. Allison said that as far as Darlington Borough Council are concerned, freedom of speech doesn't mean thoughtless speech. He said that in that clip. This is, of course, nonsense. It's not for Mr. Allison or Darlington Borough Council to determine if speech is thoughtless. And of course, I don't think the statements were thoughtless in any case. Even if the speech was thoughtless, one's right to speak isn't allowed because of how thoughtful you are. Speech is constrained by law. For example, incitement to violence, targeted harassment of an individual, or defamation are unlawful. The statements on the leaflet were not even in the foothills of the above, and that's from the Miller versus the College of Policing judgment. So, although I name Andrew Allison and Jim Bone because they were the men who were present and I perceived to be harassing us, I suspect that they may have been reciting Darlington Borough Council policy. If so, the council should review their policies and provisions in line with existing law. If the error lay solely with Mr. Allison and Mr. Bone, then the council's equality training needs to be revised to be compliant with the Equality Act and public sector equality duty as it is in law, not as they would wish it to be to suit their ideological prejudice. In conclusion, this is my personal complaint of discrimination and harassment in relation to the protected characteristics of sex and belief, in brackets, gender critical belief. I don't like the term, but we have to use it, by Darlington Borough Council on Saturday, the 8th of March, 2025. The council or its representatives, in my opinion, behaved unlawfully as it incorrectly exercised the public sector equality duty. So that's what happened on the 8th of March, in Darlington. And we didn't expect it.
We're now going to hear, it's actually a video that was recorded yesterday with Nicole Mowbray from Australia. She's from the Lesbian Action Group, and she's going to tell us about the Lesbian Action Group case and their funding appeal.
Hi, I'm Nicole from the Lesbian Action Group here in Victoria in Australia. We formed a few years ago to test the laws here in Australia because the lesbian community has been underground for at least the last 20 years in order to have lesbian-only space. So any event that is organised by the corporate LGBTIQ+ is compulsory mixed-sex space. And while that has its place, it certainly does, lesbians like to have lesbian-only space. And so we came together in order to test the laws here in Australia. So we had to apply to the Australian Human Rights Commission to get a single-sex exemption. And that was rejected. We were told we were transphobic and that we couldn't exclude trans lesbians, and therefore we couldn't get our single-sex exemption. So we took that decision to the Administrative Appeals Tribunal. We had a barrister who offered us his services and his expertise in this area, and we have a fabulous legal team behind us. I have great confidence in them. So we had a 2-day hearing last September in Melbourne at the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, and then we had to wait. We had to wait till January this year to get the result, the outcome. And the outcome wasn't in our favour. We were told that we could legally discriminate against heterosexual males, against heterosexual females, against bisexual people. We could legally discriminate against gay men. That's the whole purpose of having an exemption, is to be able to legally discriminate. But we weren't. We were told that we weren't allowed to legally discriminate against trans people because they were oppressed and we would be further oppressing them. So we are now at the situation where we still can't have public lesbian-only events here in Australia, and it's really important to us to be public so that other lesbians can find us. We've made contact with young lesbians who are terribly isolated because they cannot find the lesbian community because we've been underground. We still organise things, we still have events, but it's within a closed circle in order to keep out anyone who's not a lesbian. So they're having trouble finding us, and we totally understand that they're isolated. They're telling us they're very isolated. They're telling us that the mixed-sex events under the LGBTIQ+ is problematic in that there are males hitting on them. They don't want to be hit on by males. They don't want to be picked up by males. They're being sexually harassed. Some of them are getting into compromising positions with trans women and finding out that they're actually male, and some have been raped, some have had death threats. It's horrific. It's really hard to be a young lesbian in Australia today because of this. So this is why us older lesbians are trying to make some change so that there's somewhere for the younger lesbians to go and for us to go as well. So our next step, having been told that we can't get the exemption, is we're now going to the federal court. So our legal team are really very enthusiastic to continue to support us. We have great faith in them. They're a really, really good, strong legal team. We really should have won at the Administrative Appeals Tribunal. We suspect that the judge was gotten to. But we're hoping that at the federal court we'll have some more, might have some more luck. It's really hard to tell. And given that the Sex Discrimination Act here in Australia has been changed to the point where sex-based rights really are no longer valid. They're no longer the Sex Discrimination Act is not worth the piece of paper it's written on. in terms of protecting sex-based rights, because the government took out the definitions of man and woman and they added gender identity. And so the court, we think, is upholding the Sex Discrimination Act in its current form, and gender identity is trumping sex-based rights. So that's where we're at the moment. It's a difficult situation. The Australian government are basically discriminating against us because the Australian Human Rights Commission is a part of the government. The Australian government is signed up to numerous United Nations mandates in terms of women's and lesbian rights, and they are going against those mandates by not enabling us to be able to assemble and associate with our own cultural group. We are being denied that right, which is written in international law. Yeah, we'll see how we go at the federal court. We've got a hearing in March, which will, I think, decide when the actual hearing will be. We're hoping for August or September this year, but we don't have a date as yet. So we've been crowdfunding to pay the fees to go to court, to go to the federal court, and we've been blown away by the support we've got out there, not just within Australia, but around the world. The support's just been phenomenal. There are lesbians, I suspect, around the world watching what's going on here, because this, as we know, is an issue for lesbians around the world. It's not just happening here in Australia. I know that the general lesbian community around the world has been underground for a long time now. When we initially put in for the exemption with the Human Rights Commission, that was opened to public for people to put in, submissions as to what they thought, and overwhelmingly we got support. And even then, the Human Rights Commission wouldn't grant us the exemption. It was overwhelming support that we got publicly to have this exemption granted. And just, generally on social media, most people can't believe that this is happening, So the events that are happening where the men who say they're lesbians are going to are LGBTIQ plus events put on by those organisations, right? And we don't go to them because we're not interested in those mixed sex events. So it's not us that are putting on those mixed sex events. It's like I call them the corporate LGBTIQ plus, because it's been taken over, by the corporates. And so we've actually set up a club here, a lesbian club. We can legally have a single-sex club, and we've done that, and that has been really successful. We have several hundred members now around Australia, and we're holding events where we're able to hold events for club members, and it's proving to be really popular.
So that's like a private club.
It's a private club.
You're allowed to have that.
We're allowed to do that, yeah. But we're wanting public events so that we can capture those younger lesbians and those newly emerging lesbians who can't find us.